Morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. Today, we have a special session. We're going to be talking to Richard Klipin, former CEO of the AFA. Now, this year is a year to celebrate. It's the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the AFA in 1946, and we're going to go back at different points this year to look at some things from the past. So today we're going to talk to Richard, who was the CEO from 2006 all the way through to 2013. So let's now head over to Richard. Good morning, Richard. How are you?
Kia ora, Phil. Lovely to be here.
Fantastic. So Richard, let's start by you're in New Zealand, and there's a nice connection there because the AFA has a new CEO who started yesterday, Helen Morgan-Banda, who's also a Kiwi, so there's a real connection into New Zealand at the moment. But tell us about what you're doing in New Zealand.
Thanks, Phil, and good morning, everyone. It's really lovely to be here. Just so you know, I'm sitting at my dining room table on Waiheke Island, and for the last 4.5 years, I've been running the Financial Services Council of New Zealand, which is very akin to the Financial Services Council of Australia in terms of the membership types that we have and the things that we do. Very much an advocacy body for the life insurers, the fund managers, the KiwiSaver providers, and the health insurers and the broader community that sits around that. So yeah, that's kind of been my world, Phil, for about the last 4 or 5 years.
Fantastic. So for everyone who's online today, there will be an opportunity to ask Richard questions. So can you use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen? And for those of you who are interested in whether there'll be CPD points available today, we're not certain whether that's going to play out, but it is being assessed today, and we will know whether there are any points that come through at the end of it. So let's now reflect upon the connection between Australia and New Zealand. So the financial advisors in Australia have been going through a very challenging period for the last 10 years, but most particularly over the last 3 years since the Royal Commission final report came out. Richard, what can you tell us about what's happening in New Zealand in the financial advice marketplace?
Phil, you know, the same winds of change have washed globally. Obviously, we watch very closely the Royal Commission that took place a couple of years back, and out of that came, because a number of the brands in the Australian marketplace obviously operate and own businesses here in New Zealand. So pretty early on, when the Royal Commission started to roll through, the government here set up effectively a conduct and culture review, which was run by the twin regulators of the Reserve Bank and the Financial Markets Authority. And what they wanted to do was understand, were some of the issues that had been identified in Australia present in New Zealand? And so they looked at the banking sector, they looked at the life insurance sector, and in fact, just last week, they put out a report on the health and general insurance sector. And whilst a number of the similar issues weren't as present because the superannuation system's a much younger and somewhat different system, there were certainly areas that were called out, certainly lots of areas of improvement, and certainly lots of areas where the sector kind of, from a governance perspective, needed to do better. And really, since that time, the whole sector has been working through that. Within the financial advisor world, very similar to FOFA, there was a mandated review that came in at around 2015, which then, it was called the Financial Advisors Act. It's now translated into legislation called FISLA, which is effectively bringing all advisors into a licensed environment. Prior to this, there were different types of advisors who had different types of criteria, could advise on different types of products. And what ended up really out of that was a little bit confusing. So the similar twin peaks of greater access of advice, but also more professional advice givers, were the same things that have rolled through the Kiwi marketplace. And the FISLA regime is in transition, and Kiwi advisors, as a result of that, are doing many things that Aussie advisors have been doing for quite some time. And we're starting to see some of the changes in business models and charging models and all the kind of practice management conversations that have been happening in the Aussie marketplace for quite some time, really starting to take place here and bite in the New Zealand market.
Well, thanks for that update. I think we always take a close interest in what's happening across the ditch. I think there are many life insurance advisors who look across the ditch and wish that those same commission rates still applied in Australia.
Phil, just on that, I mean, I think what's interesting is, and this is the neat and unique thing about New Zealand, is what's being put in place in New Zealand is very appropriate for New Zealand, and New Zealand sits further east than Australia, if you will, but our influences not only come from the Aussie market, they come from the global market. And what's really good here is that both government and regulators tend to connect globally and then go what's appropriate for this marketplace, rather than just perhaps implementing stuff holus bolus. So it's been really interesting in my last few years in working in the sector, is to see how regulation changes. And whilst there may be some global pressures that come on, because there are various requirements when you're part of the OECD and so on, the way it's applied here is different. On the commission issue, as you mentioned, we haven't banned things in New Zealand, so New Zealand hasn't done those kind of things as a jurisdiction. So it's very much fit for purpose. And commission rates are still high in New Zealand relative to other places. It's certainly available in both investment and the insurance sector. Those are some of the things that were rolled into part of the conduct and culture review.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's now transition to talk about your time with the AFA. So, Richard, tell me about when you first got involved with the AFA and in what capacity.
Phil, it kind of goes back a while, and for anyone who's younger on the phone, it is last century stuff, so apologies for that. But look, when I started early on in my career, I started as a young advisor, and I had connected in with a national mutual practice, and in fact, John, who was, if you will, the practice owner, who was very involved in what was then the ALA, or the Australian Life Writers Association. There was fantastic courses, introduction to life and disability, investments, practice management. So very early on, well before I really understood what the sector was doing, I was a young kid kicking around, and that was my introduction to the Australian Life Writers Association, which kind of then went on and morphed and became the AFA. At that point, I obviously moved on, but I came back into a role at Mercantile Mutual ING, and worked closely with the board of the AFA at that point, particularly in relation to the Rising Star Award. So in those days, we had sponsored and were invited by the board of the day, and Brian Boggs in particular, to participate and help shape and guide the incoming generation of younger financial advisors. And we did that through the Rising Star Award. So I remember, first award, we were building all the processes. I was the point person at ING along with my team, and we were pointing into the AFA. We had a great number of nominees, and I remember getting on a bus and a tram as it was, and heading down to Melbourne to visit and interview a whole bunch of fantastic young financial advisors. As it turned out, one of the people we met was Esther Althouse, and we'd been kind of doing 4 or 5 appointments that particular day. I think it was Oaks Day, so it was kind of November time. The whole place was shut down because of the races, and we couldn't get a cab, so we ended up taking a tram to Esther's place. And it was her office, but it was actually her place. So we knocked on the door, were invited in. It was cups of tea and cake, and it was a very intimate kind of conversation around, the sort of work that Esther did. And as it turned out, she was the inaugural winner of the Rising Star. The cake obviously was fantastic, but it was really it was a really neat introduction to how to help younger advisors kind of really get on the ladder of success, and really that became the blueprint. And so within about a year or so, the AFA went to market looking for a CEO. They had commissioned a report by the Encore Group. Alex Keane, Graham Peaty, Matt Fogarty had been involved, and I think Alex wrote the report. And his recommendation to the AFA board was, you know, you've either got to get serious and get professional and employ someone to run the place, or it's going to be a real struggle. And the board of the day, I think under Michael Murphy's leadership, said, well, we better go find ourselves a CEO. So that kind of confluence of things took place. There was an interview process. I interviewed. I was a successful candidate, and so began a fantastic and wonderful period of my career, you know, which really kind of set me on a different path from one which was very much in one of the big product providers and manufacturers and advice into kind of the association landscape.
Right. So the AFA has been around for 75 years, but it hasn't always been up and up. There's been peaks and troughs along the way. Seemingly in 2006, as you say, you were brought on as the CEO, but you didn't have a big team. Can you talk to us about what you did to rebuild the AFA from that point?
Yeah, I think, look, anyone who's been involved in some kind of startup or turnaround, you know, has a garage story, and same with the AFA. 2006, really hard times. I think there were maybe 500 or 600 members at that time. Membership fees were low. It was really held together by, you know, blood, sweat, tears, and passion. And so there was a fantastic board, a whole bunch of fantastic members, but very little in terms of, you know, a secretariat support or an ability to kind of get stuff done. And so the AFA of the day had outsourced its secretariat functions to a business in Canberra. And the whole Canberra connection was because the initial federated AFA had a whole bunch of properties. And in those days, and a lot of them were holiday houses, the holiday houses were then sold, popped into a central fund, and they bought an office building in Canberra. So the whole business was based out of Canberra, but of course the members were everywhere but Canberra. So there was an outsourced scenario to a business in Canberra. So when I started, and Murph said, right, Klipin, you got the job? I said, right, where does that all happen, Murph? And he said, well, Canberra is where the secretariat is. I went, right, so I better hop in my car, drove down to Canberra, met Julie around the office, and met that team, and they were terrific. But it was kind of very clear to me that, you know, a membership organisation has to be close to its members. You can't run it out the back of Canberra. And plus, there was a huge asset. You know, the most valuable asset of the AFA in those days was the building. So in the end, operated out of the front room of my house, living in the inner west of Sydney, and using, you know, the local cafe in Rozelle and the Western Hotel in the city to kind of anchor and connect with people and meet with people. And very early on, you know, like there was a lot of great belief. People had seen the heady days of the AFA. There were a lot of, if I can use it, probably a Paul Keating term, but there were a lot of true believers in the AFA community. And so once they start to see the emergence of a plan, the commitment and the focus, lots and lots of people started to join in and support and get involved. And yeah, so many fantastic early starting days, from the days before we had office spaces and shiny shows and big conferences and all those kind of things.
Mm-hmm. So talk to us about some of the initiatives that you brought to bear in that resurgence of the AFA and the communities. You know, what were the principles that you built around the way the AFA operated?
Look, Phil, I mean, it's more sophisticated thinking now because I've been doing it for longer. But I think early on it was pretty clear, a bit like moving the office, we had to be where the members were. And if we're a member-based organisation, we had to have a way for members together. And that's the whole community piece. So the most powerful piece of really my time of the AFA was that it became a very powerful and very effective and very connected community. And we understood, you know, as we grew from, you know, the 500 odd members. You know, a little story of how it all started. I was invited to a Synchron conference up on the Gold Coast to speak, and I remember sitting with Jerry Porter, who was just a fantastic servant of the AFA, and Paula Zoch, and Jerry had kind of pioneered the community of the AFA in Queensland. And what he did was he ran roadshows and he took them up and down the coast, and people kind of gathered. And Paula, and then so many other people around Paula and Jerry really kind of helped. And so it was like, well, you know, that's the success, right? I could see it. It was palpable. People really enjoyed connecting together and sharing their stories. And I reflected back on where I started. You know, the lifeblood of the ALA in those days was people connecting. So anyway, we took that little idea, and with Jerry and Paula, I took to the board of the day and said, well, we probably need to do a national roadshow, a national forum. We should probably get, you know, the winners of the Rising Star Award and the Advisor of the Year and so on to come and tell their stories. And so that very first year in 2006, I think both Jimmy Taggart and Esther were, I think, the winners of those two awards from recollection. And we got on tour with a couple of other sessions and ran half-day road shows in the major cities, and people came. It was fantastic. You know, maybe we had, I don't know, 150 people or so in Sydney, and the same in Melbourne, and so on across the country. And from that little rolling ball, the momentum came, because it was clear people had stories to tell, people wanted to share. The product providers started to really connect and support because they could see that there was something going on here. And then it just kind of kicked on from there, and Gen X was spawned from that idea, and Inspire, and so on and so forth. So can go into those, but that was kind of where it started. But the core of it, the core of the idea was, we're a community. We live in and work in small businesses, and when we come together as a community, we're powerful. How do we harness that? And that really was the DNA of the AFA.
And that's part of the DNA that continues today, is that sense of community, being there to support people, having someone to connect into. And I think that's definitely still a real priority, and it's a strong need of the membership, particularly in the current phase that we're going through with so much intense reform, but also the issues with COVID. And it was great just a couple of weeks ago for the Southeast Queensland Roadshow to actually be operating. I had the chance not to participate there live, but to zoom in for a quick update. Richard, I want to just talk now about your knowledge of the ups and downs of the AFA over the years. I think in the past, the membership has been much greater than it was, obviously, when you took over. But what's your knowledge of the real heyday of the AFA?
Phil, you know, when you talk to some of the, you know, the people who were there at the start, and, you know, it is the 75th anniversary, and in, I guess it was 10 years ago, so it must be in 2011 where we did the 65th anniversary. You know, there's a group of people that went around and said, you know, we want to talk to the people who were there, perhaps not at the start, but really shepherded the organisation through good times and bad. And I'd heard some fantastic stories of field halls and great sessions and international speakers and so on, kind of through the 90s. But, you know, certainly the period from 2006 was a rebuild. And, you know, there were some fantastic things that happened, because when we looked at a board at you know, what was happening in the marketplace, you know, as like most sectors, there was a demographic change going on. So the whole Gen Next initiative was, how do you bring in and inspire and scale up and skill up a generation of younger advisors? They may not be practice owners today. They may be admin assistants. They might be paraplanners. They might be junior advisors. They may be salaried advisors. But kind of that was where the future was. And so we spent a lot of time, Gen X, and, you know, again, I think Foxy's on the line. You had Mickey's on the line. You had Sarah, and you had, again, mostly under the watchful guiding eye of Jerry Porter, I think he was the board rep of the day. But the energy that we created in that room very early on with so many people was, this is our future, and if we want it to be good, we need to grab hold of it. And we were right across the country. So that kind of power of Gen X, which then spawned the whole Gen X initiative and movement, if you will, became really powerful. And it's fantastic to see that the leadership of the AFA has really grown out of that initiative today. And to see the personal growth and the development and the confidence of people came through was just brilliant. It became pretty clear that we also needed to look broader than Gen X, because there were lots of other groups of or communities, if you will, within the community of the AFA. There were the older advisors who were looking to sell their businesses, but still stay around. How did we keep them engaged? The rise of Inspire and connecting women in the AFA and broadly in the financial services community was such a powerful idea. And the Women in Advice Award, again, such a powerful idea that brought to light so many brilliant businesses and practices that we were able to showcase. So the ability of the AFA through those periods of time was to, how do you respond to some of the regulatory change going on? Because that was often the calling card. How do you take to Canberra what the value of financial advice and advisors do? And then also, how do you kind of bring those communities within the AFA together, but also keep them in a way where they can have their own conversations? And so that period from 2006 and 7 was pretty hard, but we started to gain a lot of momentum. And it was probably coming out of the GFC that there was a lot of momentum, but the regulatory pressure and the political pressure really started to bear. And we kind of had to morph and change from being a really strong focused community group of advisors to how do we help shape and influence the political agenda? Because if decisions are made in Canberra that impact how consumers get advice, we needed to be in that conversation. So it was a pretty challenging times then, as we kind of shifted and skilled up in that regard. But anyway, hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of.
Well, I think that speaks to the community base that's so important to the AFA, but also over the years, the emerging importance of the role we play in advocacy. Now, of course, here we are in early August. We have the AFA National Conference coming up next month, the 21st and the 22nd of September. This year, once again, we're going to be doing it virtually or in a hybrid sense, because we're going to have state-based events. But we're in the middle of an outbreak, COVID outbreak here in Sydney, and early days in Brisbane. Hopefully they'll get that under control. The world we live in is very different to the world that we did live in the past. And of course, one of the key and most enjoyable times of the year was always the AFA conference. That's something that I know you were very committed to, put a huge amount of effort into. Talk to us about how you built that to what it was.
Yeah, I think you're right, Phil, and a shout out to everyone who's locked down all over wherever you are in Australia. Perhaps not all over Australia. It's been a really difficult 20 months, I think. Certainly for all of us in the sector, all of us across the world. But just when we think we have it beat, it changes again, and that ability to change and going a different direction is probably something in time that we'll all reflect on in terms of what COVID's done to how we think about our lives and our businesses and so on. In terms of conference, look, the conference did a couple of things. It was always designed to be the flagship event. So, we got pretty good at the calendar. So we always knew, and I think Gavin Glosier was one of the inspirations for this idea. We needed a fast start, and the start of a year would be the Gen X Roadshow. We knew that we had a mid-year show called the National Forum or the National Roadshow, and both of those two events became massive in their own right, but the conference was really the gathering of the community. It really was the place where we brought everyone together at scale, where we could showcase the best of the community, where we could invite stakeholders and politicians and senior people in our supply lines and so on into one community that was our community, and we were hosting them. So it was very much that idea, you know, and they just kept on building, and the reputation just kept on building because, again, you know, people, we're all social animals. We want to be together. We want to be with our friends and colleagues. We want to learn, but we also want to have fun. So there's a really strong, always content program. There's also a really strong social program and a celebratory program. And so we were able to build the awards in, fantastic gala nights, brilliant welcome sessions. You know, there was always a pretty awesome sing-along, you know, the heady days of Royal Pines and karaoke nights and dress-ups. You know, it was really just, you know, it was a fantastic way to connect with your peers, and there were so many fun winning tunes and people who wanted to sing but couldn't sing. But all of that was kind of the part of the lifeblood of it. So, I mean, that was by design, and in the end, like most things in the AFA, you know, it was by the members and for the members, and so there was a fantastic conference committee, and people just put in. You know, we ditched having professional MCs, and I remember we had brilliant MCs from, you know, right across the membership, people running and facilitating sessions. Michael Harrison kind of introduced us to the round table, professionals, whatever we used to call it. But, you know, it was like, you know, how do you get everyone sharing knowledge? And the knowledge didn't just live with the people with the grey hair. Actually, a lot of the knowledge came from the young, the enthusiastic, the brand new, who equally had stuff to share. So, you know, it was a meeting place of equals, if you will. And when you put all that together in a fabulous environment with a lot of forethought, you end up, you know, creating an alchemy. And yeah, there were some really fantastic conferences that took place in those days. And yeah, I think to your point earlier, Phil, we're all reimagining what that looks like because sometimes, you know, this, you know, Zoom, different kind of connect, but, you know, we've got to learn to live with what we've got. So yeah, that's kind of where we ended up at conferences.
Yeah, and I think you're referring to Meet the Professionals that still existed as recently as our last conference in 2019, but was supplemented by Meet the Innovators. So some of the concepts have lived on, and I think you've referred in the way you've discussed that to the way that you pulled together the best of thinking around you and created the product that people really enjoyed and look forward to. I mean, it was always a highlight of the year. It was the chance to catch up with people from interstate, and doing that every year just kept that connection going.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, you know, we then introduced, I think Livia's online, you know, the whole connect with the AFA Foundation and the ability to go, how do we reach out of our sector and into the community, and work with organisations and charities that we can help. And there were so many, you know, there were just so many, like, seriously emotive and connected moments where we had people who, you know, had illnesses, suffered illnesses. You know, the very early on, we connected with the MS Research Foundation and Jeremy Wright. And I remember it might have been the first or second conference we did, but, you know, we had people there who were you know, suffering from multiple sclerosis. They were telling their story. They were sharing their insights. We were helping to raise money to help find cures. You know, we had Betty Cuthbert turn up one year. So that kept it real. And I think that was the other thing that we try to do, is to keep it kind of really real, because in the end, you know, the business that we're in, providing financial advice and helping people live the lives they want to lead, became a really important part, rather than just kind of having a great time. It was very purpose driven, and I think that's, you know, the purpose driven people kind of really connected in and wanted to make a difference and gave so much of their time and their energy and their creativity, and you know, that was an absolute blessing.
Yeah, I think the propensity of volunteers to contribute to the AFA is a real hallmark. Now, I want to transition now to a couple of years into your time at the AFA. The global financial crisis kicked in. I think that had very broad implications for advisors at the time. It was a period of great stress. What's your recollection of how the GFC impacted the advice market and the AFA in particular?
Look, I think we all went into the GFC in certainly, like I lived through 87, but 87 didn't really kind of register like I was a kid and so on. By the time the GFC turned up, it was pretty serious. And I remember the day Lehman's went down, because I've been talking to colleagues about like, where's the world going to go? If some of these organizations can fail, then everything can fail. And if everything fails, the whole system will unwind, and we're going to be in places that we just don't know. And then the dominoes start to fall. And I remember reflecting at those times and going, like, oh my God, this is going to be life-changing stuff for the sector. And then, I remember listening to people like Don Stammer and, some of the wise, experienced heads who kind of went, look, stuff happens and then we recover. And this time, the this time it's different scenario was actually this time it's like the last time, and we'll figure it out. But in the end we did, and it's a bit like where we are with COVID. This time it's different. So there's a resilience to, if you will, the human condition. But in the way in which it reflected on the AFA was, it actually ended up being an opportunity, and it was so not expected, because I guess what happens in times of crisis is people come together. People want to come together. People want to connect and share. People want to find a way to share those experiences. And whilst the GFC was really, really difficult on so many levels for people's balance sheets and companies' balance sheets and so on, within the FSC, because we had a really clear focus and direction, it became something that was a unifying piece. And so we kind of learned from that and grew from that in terms of the things that we did and the issues that we picked up. And I remember at the Life Company of the Year Awards reflecting one time about, in the end, we live in a risky world, whether it's death or disability or pandemics now or financial risk and global meltdowns, figuring out how you live with risk in your life and become good managers of risk in your personal lives and your business lives, association lives, was one of the really important insights that kind of turned up out of that. But it also kind of triggered, obviously, a wave of change and a wave of scrutiny, because, for those of us who lived in the post-GFC world, particularly in the Australian financial services marketplace, very early on was, how could this happen on our watch? Something has to change. Let's investigate it. And I remember the origins of the Ripoll review and all the things that then emanated from that. So, in many ways, it was a moment of clarity, but it also then led to lots of other stuff. And in many ways, when the crisis turns up, there are people who grab hold of it, sometimes for good, and sometimes it's really challenging.
So no doubt with the GFC, the Ripoll Inquiry, the world changed a little bit from financial advice. The regulatory focus really picked up. What can you tell us about the politics at that time, and how closely were you engaged in what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the establishment of the Ripoll Inquiry kind of was fundamental, because it led to FOFA and then it led to pretty much everything else that came through. So pretty early on, when the GFC, tide went out and the skeletons were exposed, you had, the Storm Financials and lots of others. And I think, I think the scrutiny start to magnify big time. And the Ripoll Inquiry, obviously big time, because we, like many others, were invited to appear before Ripoll, and it was a political process. It had to be a political process. It was established by the Parliament. And so off the back of that kind of then became well, we're now in the political process. And I think that was a big learning for the FSC. If we're in the political process, we better be capable.
Richard, just quickly clarify, a big learning for the AFA, not the FSC.
Sorry, Phil. Thank you. I knew I was going to say something like that at some point. Thanks for picking it. So once you're in the political process, you've kind of got to be on your game and figure out how do you, what is the message and how do you get to the people who are shaping the outcomes. So that was a pretty big learning for the AFA in those days, and it was pressure filled, it was stressful, and we connected in with Kerry Chikarovsky, who in my time was a fantastic guide in terms of how to get through and into the political decision makers, and what's the point and what's the message. Julie Bennett similarly was fantastic because she would help us shape the message and take that to marketplace. So from Ripoll came everything, and then the stakes got pretty high. And of course, like I said, where that's continued on and probably got even more intense as the years have rolled through. But the equipping of an AFA community to be able to have the conversation, not that every conversation will be one, became really important. And so reaching out to politicians, building relationships with all sides of the house, understanding how ASIC operated, understanding what role Treasury played in that, kind of became things that really became part of the day job. And certainly when I was interviewing with Murph back in 2006, that was really never part of the conversation. And I think that was probably a maturing and an evolving of the AFA in that time.
Yes, I mean, I think politics has become such an important part of determining the future direction of the regime that we operate within. So I guess you've dealt with a number of ministers over the time, and no doubt shadows as well. What can you tell us about your experiences with working with the ministers of the day?
Really interesting, because again, wasn't part of my background, but in the end, politicians have got it's their role, it's their professional calling. The first minister we dealt with was Nick Sherry, who was obviously on the Labor side and really knowledgeable about the super system. In many ways, I kind of felt he was almost the successor to the Paul Keating vision of what super could be, as a way for Australians to create wealth and retire with dignity and so on. So engaging with Nick, and it was probably fair to say that because it was our first foray into the political arena, we had some to do with politicians, but not a huge amount. There were early days of just getting to know you, and who do you represent, and what value do your people deliver, and what's the value of advice, and all I hear are bad stories, tell us the good stories, and so on. And so early on, we decided the best way to engage with politicians, over and above visiting them in Canberra or their electoral offices, was to invite them onto platforms. And I remember a really sizable function that we had in Melbourne with Nick Sherry, and that was fantastic. That became a way in which we engaged with the same as Chris Bowen. Had a huge show with Bill Shorten when he was minister, but we also took the view that we kind of needed to be across all sides of the house. And so we established really effective working relationships, as it was initially with Joe Hockey, with Malcolm Turnbull, and then in particular with Matthias Cormann, who was in that role for a long time and became, really interested in the sector and really understood what was going on, and obviously was the other side of the argument, particularly when FOFA was going through. I feel that obviously includes your days, and I remember you and I heading to Canberra often, lots of long time phone calls and nuances, and because in the end it's a legal process in the bills, and you've got to get the wording exactly right if you want the intent to go through. So again, that was a skill set that the AFA had to build, You know, with your appointment as COO back, you'll tell me when it was, but it was an acknowledgement that we really had to have that capability if we were going to seriously influence any outcomes.
Yes, indeed. And look, let's come back to reflect upon some of that in just a moment. But when we had the Gillard government re-elected back in 2010, all of a sudden we found that we had a minority government and we had the FOFA reforms on the agenda, and there was quite a bit of argy-bargy to get FOFA through that minority government and getting the support of the independents. What's your recollection of that time?
Yeah, I mean, you know, politics is everything I said before, but then there's all the stuff that happens in the back rooms. And whilst we might have been coming in one door to talk to politicians, you know, someone else with a different view might have just left the back door or come in the other door, if you will. So there was a lot of play, and, you know, in the end, landing politically is such a, you know, in the end, it's a kind of compromise, right? And particularly when you're in a minority, landing in a place where you want to keep the intent of what you're trying to do true is in the end a negotiation. And so, yeah, Phil, I remember you and I having conversations. I think you were mostly involved with it, but, you know, it was like, we've had a win because this word or that comma or that phrase has entered the bill, and we've been assured that we've got support for that. And in a minority government, that could have been true for that moment, but at another moment it might have been different. And so, you know, you're never going to win everything, I guess, was the line. I think the other obvious thing to state here is that, you know, the political debate in Australia wasn't just the politicians. You know, we were obviously very involved and engaged, but the very powerful other players in the sector, you know, were right in the middle of it, and had great influence. And they were formidable adversaries. You know, David Whiteley at ISN was a formidable participant and player, if you will, as they remain today. And it was, you know, again, a great learning for the AFA to figure out how does that stuff actually play out, because the stakes are so high. You know, there's $3.1 trillion of assets in the superannuation system. That's a huge amount of power to be able to help try and shape and influence. And so it kind of became really interesting to see how to do that. But, you know, we were in the process, so we had to do the best we could for our members and for our sector, on the basis that, you know, great financial advice is good for Australians, and that's where we were coming from. So we did it with authority, we did it with content, and we did it with our strongest commitment. And sometimes, you know, it's not a nice game to play. It's often a really hard game to play to get to where you need to land to. And Phil, your advocacy, obviously, that I've kept on, you know, has kind of picked up that tradition, and it's fantastic to see. It's not always easy, but I know from your perspective, it's probably pretty bloody hard. But it has to be said, or has to be done, if you will.
Yeah, I think there's no question that it's not easy, and you have more failures than you have successes. You talked about David Whiteley. I remember going down to Canberra one day back in, I think, March of 2012, and we walked into the staff dining room in Parliament House, and we ran into David Whiteley, and he had this incredible grin on his face. It was an absolute Cheshire cat. And it emerged that was the day that it was announced that they'd done the deal with the FPA. That was the mechanism by which those independents were prepared to push forward and accept the FOFA amendments legislation. And very shortly afterwards, the bill was passed. But what I want to do now is transition back. You mentioned Matthias Cormann. He was the shadow minister for a long period of time. He was there through the FOFA debate and the PJC inquiry into the FOFA legislation. Matthias Cormann is now the Secretary General of the OECD, one of the key bodies in the world, one of the key global bodies. But I want to reflect upon the most remarkable thing, that he once did a roadshow with the AFA. Now, really want to know about how you managed to achieve that outcome, to have someone who was an upper and coming politician who grew to be one of the core parts of the government until he left to take up the role at the OECD. But how did you manage to get him to do an AFA roadshow?
Invited him. The flippant answer. The real answer is, Phil, if we go back, we knew we had to engage with politicians. And there's always new people coming into the House. And our committee in WA, and I think maybe Steve Knight's on the other end of the line, but AFA members aren't only members of the AFA, they're involved in all sorts of organisations. And so there was some really good connectivity through the membership into various political candidates, political parties, and so on. And I do remember heading over to WA one time, again early on, and I think Steve Knight and the WA team had kind of corralled, I think Michaela Cash was there, and I think Matthias was there. Like, there were a whole range of politicians who in the end hit the national stage and probably are on the national stage, global stage. And it was they were invited into our dining room, if you will, into our family. And so from that became a very powerful idea. How could we work effectively with politicians to help educate them and vice versa? And look, the Matthias relationship, he and I connected really well personally, but he also had a really clear view and kind of understood the value of financial advice. And of course, he had a, if you will, perhaps a different political view of where the changes were heading, and he wanted to influence that. And so he became a really powerful ally, if you will, of the value of financial advice and certainly the work that the AFA was doing. And so, I rang him up one day and I said, "Hey, Matthias, we got these roadshows. Are you interested in coming to talk?" He said, I can't do his accent, but anyway, he said, "Sure, if you tell me where it is, I'll be there." And, he pretty much did the whole national roadshow, which on reflection is like, that's a significant commitment. But he was excellent, and he was very in the round. He was very flexible around engaging and chatting and taking questions on the fly, which is kind of part and parcel of their job. But, he was a very, fantastic person to work with, as we did over a period of time. And obviously he then went on to much greater roles, in the government when they got in. So, that was really good.
Of course, there was that hilarious interchange between Brad Fox and Matthias on that particular roadshow, but I'll leave that for another time. Obviously, you've reflected upon a few people who were very instrumental in your time as the CEO of the AFA. You talked about Murph. You've talked about people like Mike Nowak and Brad Fox when he was the president. The directors of the AFA, they get a small reward for the time they put in. I think it's often substantially underestimated how much time and effort and commitment they put in. Mike Nowak and Sam Pereira have recently, with me, presented to a couple of parliamentary committees that the work that you need to put in to get that message right and to deliver it it cannot be underestimated. Look, I welcome your thoughts on some of the people who have really contributed above and beyond what would be expected of them, just to try and make the AFA as successful as it could be. I'm noting that you might just pick out a few, not to exclude the others, but your thoughts on those who have really made a difference.
Phil, it's an unfair question. It's like asking a parent, who do you love the most? And the answer is I love everyone equally. But look, at a group level, the role that the directors played, everyone was a practitioner. Like that's the rules, right? So you're running your own business and you're doing AFA work. And because the AFA was growing and growing, the work became bigger and bigger and bigger. And because it's a purpose-driven place, people gave with purpose. So it wasn't just show up for an hour a month or an hour a week or whatever. It was like seriously involved. So look, there were some fantastic directors. I think Horsey might be on phone very early on. He was involved. The board of the original board of the day that appointed me had some, Hugh Crawford was running the books, wouldn't let anyone spend any money, made the directors sleep head to toe on beds in hotel rooms. So the story goes. And he was really custodian of the financial position that the AFA found itself, but also where it was heading to. And it was, anyway, fantastic work that he did. Michael Murphy, the late great Michael Murphy, absolutely inspirational man. And he was only as chair for a period of time, and then Dennis Bateman was elected, and I think Batman's on the phone today. And in those days, the AFA appointment process could get a little political. Let's put it that way nicely. It got a whole lot better afterwards, but with the return of Dennis into the chair, like the place just kicked on, and we had some fantastic directors in his time that really helped shape the organisation. And what's nice to see is that a lot of those people are kind of still involved. So boards of directors, presidents, huge role and huge commitment. I can't name everyone, so I won't, but just to suffice to say, brilliant work. But I did want to kind of call out a couple of the team, because I mentioned that we'd been operating in a secretariat outsource office in Canberra. We then moved it into the Servcorp offices in Market Street in Sydney, and employee number one was Janelle Wales, and I think Janelle's on the phone today. But basically it was Janelle and I, and then employee number three was Mel, and the three of us with a fantastic board did so much stuff. And it was a labour of love. Let's put it that way. But you can't run only on labours of love, and so we had to scale up, get larger, and probably the seminal moment in the finances of the place was we ended up selling Canberra. There was a board paper which basically said sell Canberra, buy Sydney, and that really changed, I think, some of the fortunes of the AFA, because we got a really good price for the Canberra building. We were able to build and buy, so we did not build, but buy a floor of the Seidler. I think it was Harry Seidler's last building in Sydney before he passed, which became, I think, Clarence Street. And that became a fantastic investment because we bought, basically, I remember Hugh Crawford and I, Foxy, I think you might have been there. We were wandering around and we had a site inspection and we're like, this is fantastic. And we bought it in the end for a song. But it really turbocharged the asset base of the organisation. And so, it is all about people, the committees that we had, the support that we had, the people that we reached out to, and of course the board became kind of critical. So just a shout out to all the people who may be on this phone or watch it. It was a joy and a pleasure because pretty much everyone I ended up working with, we ended up kicking on and doing some fantastic things and became, buddies for a long, lifelong buddies. So, yeah.
All right. Mel, if you're there, would you mind putting back up the 65th anniversary book?
Phil, just, sorry, Wayne's online as well. Wayne makes a great point. One of the early servants who had kind of moved on from the AFA, but was Canberra-based, was Dougal Mitchell. And he was and I met him a few times, but he was the glue that held a lot of the place together through the really, really tough days before we kind of started the regeneration and regrowth. So Wayne, thanks for that remind.
Indeed, and there's a number of those key people who've been involved. So Mel, Richard, you did refer to Mel Favaloro a little while back, and she was on the front page of the 65th anniversary book from 2011, along with other people like Russell Collins and Michael Murphy. 65th anniversary, it's hard to believe it's 10 years ago. It was the year that I joined the AFA. Tell us about the celebrations for the 65th.
I think we did the conference, and we must have done the conference in 2011. And I remember Geordie Hawke toasting on the Royal Pines platform with everyone with a glass of champagne and saying a whole bunch of very wise words. And we then went and had a party. We knew we wanted to create a legacy, and this book that you see was a legacy, and there was fantastic support of the day from Pina at AIA, which allowed us to do it. But once we said, let's do the book and let's use the conference to celebrate, this book then kind of became a bit of a reach back. And there's some beautiful photos, you know, from the old days, as it were. Well, they were old days then, they're probably older days now, but yeah, there was a really rich fabric of people telling stories and people in the community and lots of people from, you know, who were past, present and future. So, you know, it was a great project to be involved in. And at that conference, we gave everyone a copy of this book. So if you were at that conference, you've probably got a copy somewhere in your bookshelf, hopefully.
Absolutely, and it's fantastic that we've got a soft copy of it, and it's great to reflect back on that. The remarkable thing is Mel's still with the AFA, someone who joined the AFA back in 2008, in March of 2008, some 13 years on, she's still around the AFA, always likes to take a back office seat. It's good to see her on the front page there, and obviously we invite Mel to join the webinar. She's got the job of asking any questions that come up. But Richard, your reflections on all those years of working with Mel, and I know you mentioned Janelle as well, who was there for quite a period of time. Any particular thoughts on Mel?
Look, Mel's, you know, the fact that she's still there is the heart and soul of the AFA team, keeper of the corporate memory way back. Hey, a shout out to Mel for kind of, if you like, keeping the flame alive. Phil, that baton's partly with you as well. And, you know, I've seen the comments from Godfrey and others, you know, everyone, you know, has got some beautiful and wonderful memories of people who contributed and people that they worked with and people they're in the trenches with. And that is the AFA, you know, it is the collection of stories of people, of connections and relationships. And that's why it's such an important and powerful kind of part of the past, but certainly part of the future. So, you know, I can only wish the AFA community really well to continue to grow and prosper. There are tough times now. There will always be tough times, but there will also be good times. And, you know, it's a bit to the mission of my current role, which is if financial advice is transformative and people are in better stead because of good quality advice with good relationships with their trusted advisor, that's going to get everyone to a better place. And that's why it's such an important organisation to celebrate its 75th anniversary and to look forward to the next 10, 20, 50, 70 years.
Fantastic, Richard. Mel, are there any questions that, there's been lots of feedback, but are there any questions that you'd like to put to Richard before we run out of time?
There's no questions at this stage from the floor, but Richard, there's lots of lovely comments and being said about the good old days. But, you know, for me, you know, it wasn't, there's always so many fond memories I've had working with you and Janelle and Phil. But one of the fondest memories I have of you was there was no issue that was too big or small. We could always come and knock on your door and you were always there for all your staff, your members, and the community. So thank you for that, and that'll always be a memory for me.
Thanks, Mel. And anytime anyone's in New Zealand, when the bubble back opens, feel free to pop on over and come and say hi.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're out of time. The feedback has been fantastic with all of those comments. It's really always nice just to go back and reflect upon the great days of the past and the things that really were so important in the lives of and particularly the professional lives of so many members of the AFA. We really appreciate you doing this, Richard, in our 75th anniversary year. All the best luck and success over there in New Zealand. And once again, many thanks for your participation today. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, Mel. Thanks, everyone.